Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy McElhone, Executive Director of 5 Points. I am not Carl Goulet, who is our gallery director, quite obviously, couldn't be with us tonight, and I am going to attempt to be half as good as Carl is when he does this. So I would like to begin by welcoming everyone that is coming on and the participants as I see them entering. Maybe we give it a second or two. And then again, I'd like to say good evening and introduce tonight's artists. The first artist I'd like to introduce is Jill Enfield. She's a fine art photographer. She's an author and an educator and has accomplished international acclaim in all three of those areas. Jill was brought up by an immigrant family, and she wanted to create a project that honored immigrants in their role in our society, and she's certainly done that in the show that is now in our East Gallery. Her collection of 30 wet plate collodion portraits of individuals who arrived in the US during the 1960s and after is a real tribute to the immigrants and how they contributed to American society. Enfield, or Jill, has taught an array of photo processes at many colleges and universities and art centers around the world, including the 5 Points Art Center on University Drive in Torrington. She's also the author of several books on photography and is included in permanent museum collections around the world. Welcome, Jill Enfield.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now, let me introduce John Keefer. John's paintings are large, dramatic, beautiful, rendered, metaphoric representations of the artist's inner turmoil. I think that's a good way, John. I was first introduced to John's paintings by a piece that is now hanging at the 5 Points Art Center. And they certainly depict overwhelming stress. And as he says, as John says, and he'll talk more about that, is my paintings are me being dragged and kicking and screaming into a meaningless present. I want to say here something that is really interesting is that John does not maintain a CV or a record of exhibitions, although he's exhibited his work widely. He's a Yale grad, and he's also part of many private and public collections, including the 5 Points Art Center. That is John Keefer. Jane Rainwater's exhibition, The Botanical Tyranny Dollhouse. How do I begin to say? You walk into that room and you first think, oh, isn't this pleasant? And we've seen so many people do that if they visited the gallery. And then on closer examination, challenges and questions are revealed darker truths. Here are drawings, the installation itself, for me, are a little bit about looking, just how we look and how we interpret. Jane grew up in Westport, Connecticut. She teaches art and design at several colleges and universities in Connecticut, or she did until she has just recently retired. She's the owner of Rainwater Design, and she holds an MFA from the Art Institute of Boston, a BFA from the Hartford Art School, and she received a Radius Emerging Artists Fellowship from the Aldrich Contemporary Museum in Ridgefield, Connecticut. She's also exhibited in galleries and museums throughout the country. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you.
And now it's my turn to introduce Power Boothe. Power has exhibited his paintings for over 4 decades. His work, again, like the rest of this amazing group of artists, is represented in public collections all over the world. Power was the former dean of the Hartford Art School. He now teaches at the Hartford Art School. And on another level that brings 5 Points into it, when 5 Points was first just a temporary gallery, a showcase for a summer, I reached out to different artists that I thought would bring quality art into Torrington. And I said to someone, I'm going to invite Power Boothe. And they said, oh, he's not going to do it. So I called Power Boothe and he said, sure. And after that, Power was such instrumental in helping me figure out the first steps in what we were doing. And then Power Boothe was in our first board. Besides being an amazing artist, he's been such a contributor to 5 Points. And I'm so honored that he will moderate your talk this evening. And so now, Power, I turn it over to you.
Maybe it's on mute.
Power, you're on mute.
I have to unmute. So there, all those kind things I said, Judy. Thank you for your introduction. but it's really my honor and pleasure to try to move this conversation forward and have it more be more between the three artists who have brought together this show, and you've obviously curated it, but it's quite a remarkable show in that John seems to have this vision of the landscape and a kind of stressful wreckage that conjures up the notion that systems are collapsing. There's war, and actually Jill made that point that there are no people in these landscapes. It's just machinery, it's objects. And then Jill's House of Immigrants, what I found compelling and deeply moving was just how everyone's eyes were on you. There's a kind of intensity of the eyes that Jill, you seem to want to get close to people. So on the one hand, it's very, very intimate. Even the photographs along the wall in which you have the images of more recent immigrants. And then I began to think of those eyes as being more accusatory. Like, what have you done? What have I gotten myself into? But maybe I'm reading too much into it. On the other hand, at the center, Jane's house, just the interior space of this seeming Victorian welcoming parlor, and yet on the walls and in every image you find images of violence, of weapons, of hand grenades, of arrows, of barbed wire, and associated with insects and animals. It was almost as if the longer I stayed in there, the more I became aware that maybe this is the insects are having their revenge on our human expansion on this planet. Has we've been very unconscious about the impact, the costs of human progress, as it was titled. And we're now looking at the costs of this astonishing expansion that, science made possible, but now what have we done? Can we do something about what the impact on our habitat? So there's a general between the three of you, there's a general sense of anxiety about the world. And maybe I should start with you, John, because you are you there? Oh,
yeah.
Now we're looking at images.
There we go.
John. So John, I was reminded, and I think I mentioned it to you at the opening, but when I look at your work, I just think the painting is gorgeous. And I'm reminded of Peter Howe, who was part of the 5 Points board and a photographer who was a war photographer, who would say there was always this tension in war photography, because sometimes you get the most exquisitely beautiful images, but it's also a war. And you're kind of caught between the aesthetic appeal and then the content, which is quite the opposite. And that paradox seems to be part of your work, that you cultivate this. It's a beautiful, sensuous kind of painting, a sense of care. Although, the paintings kind of stopped before it being finished, which was great. We're caught in the process of you assembling this imagery. And then you realize, it's under stress, where whatever we're looking at is it's being blown up or crashed or on fire. So I'm just very curious about your thoughts related to this work. John?
Well, I guess everybody must have, I would imagine, a set of sort of like a set of rules that they follow in order to, you know, accomplish the different things that they want to accomplish. My thing that I want to accomplish is that I think it would be gratifying to be to do something like art as well as I can, well being a you know, a pretty broad term. You know, it could mean most authentic or most material accomplished, whatever. I mean, it means what it means to me. So you know, following the rules that I have for how do I be the most interesting artist I can be, this is where I arrive at with my pictures. You know, I have certain decisions that I make, like, you know, painting should always be huge, just, you know, because that's more likely to make it work well for me. And painting should have a dramatic subject matter. You know, it should be simple. The composition should be simple. It should be morally ambiguous, pardon me, as far as, you know, that kind of response that somebody might have to it. Wouldn't be neutral, but, you know, so those are like my rules. And when I follow those rules, this is what I get.
I like it. Yeah, well, I'm still feeling that what is so deeply compelling for me in this work is a genuine tension between how you're making it, and there's a kind of sensuality to that, a sense of care, and then the subject matter. And I think it, you know, it sort of sums up our situation in the world. You know, we all have our lives that we're living, and at the same time, we sort of are aware that there are these forces outside that we are participating in, that are where systems are collapsing. You know, wars are going on, and, you know, there's so much injustice, and there's that sense that we would love to fix it, but we don't know what to do. I don't know. I find your work really sits in this place between a deep care about the world, and then it's facing some reality about the world. It's
I
very
agree, Power. And one of the
disturbing.
things that I wrote about
Yeah.
John's work was it's a perfect marriage of technique and content. There's all this great painting technique that you see in these works, that it's so powerful just on the basis of being a painting. And then the content is shocking, elusive. You know, we don't know if these are real events. We don't know if they're fake events. I just found this work to be absolutely intriguing. And that very special place where technique and meaning, content, make a beautiful marriage.
And I like how you're thinking about it. I almost feel it's a tension that has a certain balance. There's a tension between that sense of care and then a kind of destruction. So yeah, technique, it's this ambiguous place in between, you know, an intimate caring about the world, and then the event that, you know, seems to be tearing it apart.
I like little, like almost like logic jokes Like,
What?
I like little, like almost like logic jokes.
Okay,
Like, for example, I mean, a painting necessarily does not take part in destructiveness because it is a thing being made. It's the opposite of destruction. So even in an image that is, I mean, they're so opposite, they almost don't have anything to do with each other. And
but
yet there it is.
they are.
Yeah. Or, you know, is there really any destruction there? I mean, how would you even say that that was a true statement? Only in the sense that, well, somebody probably took a photograph of something somewhere that really happened, but that just seems so so many steps removed from what you can see if you're looking at this, you know, these things, standing in the room looking at them.
Well,
You know,
I'm just thinking, John, there's a sort of sense that you're constructing a painting, like trying to grab hold of this image, and the image itself is blowing away. Yeah, I mean, so it's very ethereal, you know, it's not, you're trying to paint something that
I was telling
is
somebody
disappearing.
at the opening that when I was in grade school, like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I can't remember what it was, and we had our history was American history, and in our textbook there was reproductions of paintings, and it was just one of the first times that it ever really struck me how mysterious painting is, because there was a battle scene and there was smoke in the battle scene, and I just remember wondering, like, how, you know, I mean, as a kid, not even, you know, with no idea of how to make a painting, like, how did they do that? Did they have to make smoke in the color of the stuff flying behind it? So it's a lifelong obsession, I guess is what I'm getting on to. It's just an interesting thing. How do you do that to make it work so that it's both like intelligible and fugitive?
Yeah, no, it's great. I love it. And Jill, I'm just thinking of your house, how you constructed this house out of the images of people in transition, you know, moving from one country, one culture to another. Yeah, it's an extraordinary experience to walk in and be a part of this sort of situation that, again, it's a crossing a threshold, right? It's not a place you can normally stay for very long.
No, it's,
Kind
you
of
know,
anxiety about it.
yeah, because they're all, you know, you're staring at them, but they're all staring very much back at you. I also really like how when somebody is walking through and you're standing outside, you sort of see their shadows. So it's almost like the ghost of, you know, past immigrants are also walking through along with you. So I think that it's a very spooky way to, you know, to view it, where you're being stared at and you're seeing the ghosts of the shadows, and it all came together like that.
Yeah, no, the eyes got me, Jill, in this work. I felt like there's a seriousness, an earnestness, and a kind of fear about what's going to happen. You know, they're in transition.
Yeah, well, you know, the whole idea of having these very slow exposures, and so they're moving as the image is being taken, and so that also, I think, does add. I'm glad that comes across, because that's what I wanted. That was my feeling towards it, where they're in transition, but I think that you looking at them you're also in transition. So it goes back, and there's a back and forth.
And your medium is in transition. You're using an older medium, and you're using digital technology. So you're crossing over about 100 years of photography within within these, within the process. So the process is very evident too. And like, in some ways, like John's work, it cracks and it drools and it breaks and it's ethereal.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, the images do that on their own because it is this older technique, and it is, you know, everything about it has my hand in it, similar to a painter like John. But then when it went on to the house with these old windows, so the structure itself is also decaying, and the images are also decaying as they're on the glass. So it's constant movement.
Yeah, no, it's great. Jane, let's go to your interior, your invitation to this kind of parlor setting. I love the idea that we have the man's chair and the woman's chair. I assume the man's chair has the arms and the women's chair doesn't.
You'd be correct.
Are so big. So
And
you're
the ladies has the footrest.
and you're taking us back in time. Yeah.
Yes.
And you are finding, then we look carefully at the patterns and we go, oh my God. There's a dark side to this world, Jane. So talk to us about that.
Well, my elevator pitch is kind of, I'm going to show you beauty and I'm going to bum you out. And that's been my work's idea for a long time. In previous work I've done very, very beautiful things that have very, very dark undercurrents. And in this particular installation, I'm talking about a lot of different things. So it can be confusing, but everyone can sort of take it on their own level. But one of the things I'm talking about here is colonialism and how these plants became medicines and everything else. And during the 19th century, with the Victorian collectors that sailed all over the world, they took things. But I started to wonder who they took them from and what ensued while they were taking those things. Like, they're taking sacred plants that could heal the world, but they might belong to indigenous people and they might have killed a whole bunch of people to get those things. Now, the reason I have the dollhouse is, you know, what you're looking at now is the complete, you know, the very first installation of this. It goes through changes every time I install it. Every time it's different. And I decided to create the dollhouse because just of what you were talking about earlier, Power, which was, this is about the power of looking, of really, really looking at something. And even when you look at the panorama, it kind of looks like a dollhouse in itself. But then what I realized was I was trying to get people to look more closely to see the subtlety of this work, because some of it can be very subtle. In an installation, it's not as subtle. But just to kind of get people to really look closer, because nobody can resist a dollhouse. I mean, nobody. And I've been to all kinds of miniature museums and all kinds of things to study the dollhouse. And I said, this is the way people are going to look at my work closely, not by increasing scale, not by doing other things, making bugs giant, but to, because my work is very much about scale, but to put the dollhouse in so everyone like peeks in, they have to see, and then they suddenly understand what the whole room's about.
So it's the key.
Yeah, and I just made it. So I didn't provide a key for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's so it's a house within the house.
Exactly. exactly. And Victorians, huge collectors of everything. You know, you look in the Athenaeum, you look at the JP Morgan stuff he collected over the world. And, you know, what did he do to get that stuff? That's kind of where my question happened. Plus, I saw a Jerusalem artichoke at the farmer's market. And I said, gee, that looks kind of like a grenade. And something clicked in my brain that brought me to this place.
So Jane, what question do you have for either Jill or John?
Well, I made 2 comments. Of course, you know, did I print out my questions? No. As I said about John's work, you know, it's a perfect marriage of technique and context. And Jill's work, in terms of crossing the threshold, is a perfect marriage of process and idea. I have a lot of questions for Jill about her process, like, who are these immigrants? Did you photograph them recently? Are they people you have known? These photographs are arresting, and you know, the people are, they're so, you can see, as you said, Power, so much is said with their eyes. The fear, the anticipation, the unknowns. I love this woman here, the Asian woman, if you go down a bit, she probably stayed the stillest for her portrait because and yet she's looking off into this faraway place where so many of the others are looking sort of directly at you. And so were these recent immigrants, or I mean, I think they are, that you've used this old technique on, right?
Correct. Yes. Everybody has. So my family had to leave Germany in the 1930s. And so I wanted to separate myself a little bit from that. And so I gave myself the job of finding immigrants that had come here after. It didn't have anything to do with World War II. It could have had something to do with everything else, political asylum from whatever country they were from, or just because they wanted to move for education or for work. It didn't all have to be political asylum, but it had to be from the 1960s on.
I see.
And so they're recent, you know, relatively so. I mean, at this point, I guess it's not so recent anymore, is it? But so they were taken from about 2006 until the show went up in Ellis Island in 2017. So over that, you know, 9-year period of time, I lived in Manhattan, and I do know I know all of them. Some of them I have become friends with through friends, but I met everybody. I knew most of them. And then someone would say, you know, a friend of mine is from Germany. Would you want to photograph him? Or would you want to photograph someone from Poland or wherever? And so, but I would say almost everybody that we're looking at in this particular group, I mean, I have over 100.
Oh, that was the question I was going to ask.
Yeah,
is like,
I have over 100 of people.
Yeah.
So most everybody. Now the woman that's underneath, the Asian woman you mentioned, and in between the 2 guys, and looking off, yeah, Khadija. She worked at the telephone store, you know, on my corner. And I asked her, she had just moved from the Ivory Coast, and I had asked her if she wanted to be photographed, and she said yes. And we have become very good friends. And she's now moved to the West Coast, but we, you know, we'll text each other all the time. And so they're all people that I know. It's very hard not to know an immigrant when you live in New York City.
So Jill, I was struck by the idea that, by the notion that obviously it's a very concerted decision, talking about John and his rules to
Mhm.
really not, it's not just a headshot. It's like, it's even closer. You don't show the body. You don't show
Right.
the hands. And sometimes the head is cropped. And the image has a kind of, it doesn't feel stilted. It has a kind of snapshot quality, even though these are long poses. So how did you come to that decision?
Well, I tend to think about a project and then work through it as I'm shooting it. So a lot of my first images are just eyes. And then I started moving a little bit further away to capture more of their faces. And on one of the sides of the house is full body shots of actually my plumbers. That the side that you're looking at, I don't know if you can tell so much, but they're at their car. I was photographing. So after I did a lot of faces, I thought I needed to mix it up a little bit. And so I did pull back. And I also, all of the images that you're looking, that you were looking at in the grid that Judy was going up and down with, were in my apartment. But then I decided that I should venture out, and I started to photograph people where they work outside, most of them at restaurants. They were, restaurant owners. But the guys with their car are my plumbers, and they passed by while I was photographing someone else. And I asked if they would stop and I could photograph them. So, some of it's serendipitous, but for the most part, everything was planned, and it was just a matter of making choices as I went further and further through the shooting process.
So Jill, do you have a question for John or Jane?
Well, I did, but I also didn't print them out. So hopefully I will remember.
That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
Remember.
Because I know I had for both of them. Let me see. So John's been quiet, so I'm going to pick on John a little bit, and then I want to go back to my question for Jane. So John, I did. I love these. I love that they're so beautiful to look at, but then they're about destruction. But you don't have, it does seem like it's about war, but there's no people in them, which I find more appealing, because then I really, if you see dead bodies, you just sort of, turn away, I think. With something like this, they're so beautiful, but yet really about destruction. But did you make that choice of not having people in your images for that reason, or for another reason? Do you not paint people? I was just curious.
Well, I think of the ships for sure, and the helicopter and the plane to slightly lesser extent, but to and I to me they're bodies. The ship might be about the size of a human being, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall if it was laying out in the ocean or whatever. It's like a bed or a bathtub or something like that. So, again, these are not. See, I don't know anything about war or destruction, right? These are paintings, is all. And they have different meanings, that you could see these larger shapes as a body implies a certain, sympathy or tenderness that one naturally feels towards vulnerable bodies. So anyway, I don't really, yeah, because it's like you can't have people in a painting. I mean, you can have a person shape in a painting, but you can't have people in a painting. So it's always something, everything is always a metaphor for something else in a way. If that's how I play this.
So that the objects are metaphors for people in a way, do you think?
Well, I mean, they serve a similar purpose. You know, to my way of thinking, the moment of truth is when you have you know, like an optical experience that you're like you're aware of it. Like you're like, oh, that's torqued in space in a certain way, and I can feel that in my body or whatever. That those are, to me, sort of like, that's the sacred ground to stand on, and everything else is the way to get there.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's really interesting, because I hadn't thought of these wrecks as of the body. And of course, they're sized that way. So that really makes sense and impact in a way that I didn't really think about.
Mhm.
So thanks for pointing that out. I don't think you need people. It's kind of evident, especially in the aircraft crashes.
It's also talking about this act of engaging in painting, you know, where it's no longer an object, but we enact it in us. So we become the body. You know, I liked his reference to feeling it, you know, like that's this. I'd love to talk to you more, or have you talk a little more about that sacred ground of when the painting, I think of it as kind of waking up, you know, and in a way the viewer has to do that work. Yeah. And the painting's an invitation to do that work.
And it needs to have stimulus that will initiate the process. I think is I guess what you maybe call a formalist take on the matter. You know, amounts of color and movement and feelings of density, or you know, all just sort of like the basic stuff. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's like, you know, I mean, those are I guess those are the things that end up, you know, taking us out of our ordinary experience when you see a painting that's got, you know, certain kinds of optical events happening on it, or any artwork. I mean, you know, it's you know, it can be in the sense of design and movement that there is in the Victorian rooms that we were talking about, and the you know, or design in the space that sort of makes you aware of your own size, like
The dollhouse that Jane was talking about.
Sure, yeah.
Suddenly you have to change scale, and you have a whole new understanding about the whole room because you've had to change your scale, right? I mean, I'm thinking along those lines. Maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm learning from you is really the subject matter is not as important as the means by which it draws you in to the act of experiencing the painting. Is that true?
Yes, I think that's my sense of what I would like to accomplish is that you're drawn in and it, you know, maybe not life altering, but you just have a slight, you know, shift in your sense of what's real, or what, you know, just or how things are put together. You know,
Well,
it's a little gift for you.
well, it's interesting. Okay, so I see your the drama draws you in. Jane's dollhouse draws you in, and Jill's Glasshouse draws you in. We're each of you is shifting scale in a really interesting way that then allows that the whole to show up. There's an intimacy to that act that I find really compelling. I love how you paint, John. It's just so tasty.
It's slurpy and delicious.
And I love the cracks and the things that go wrong in Jill's photographs, because they're always, you know, they're very sensual. And then, you know, Jane, you've drawn us into a very comfortable space, and then we realize, oh my God,
We want out.
our main,
Horrible.
We want out.
but there's a, it just got more interesting. But that dollhouse then takes you into another scale. It gives you that whole room back to you in a new way. This show is really important to go and experience. It confirms to me how important it is to be with the work. You can't just look at it on a.
I agree.
So, John, do you have any questions for Jill or Jane?
I'm curious. Jill, how like is in your decision to work in the medium of a room, basically, were you thinking of the design of it as having like a particular meaning of like to like sort of in conversation with other design spaces?
The design of the house wasn't as important to me as it figuring out how I could make a glass house with the thought of everyone's an immigrant. There's nobody in this country that's not an immigrant except for Native Americans. Everyone else has come here at some time or another, whether it be, 200 years ago or in the 30s or in the 60s, whenever, or now, whenever it was, everybody here is an immigrant. And they make such a big deal about it all the time of, don't let too many in, and we have to have a limit and all of this. And it bothers me so much that people forget that they are immigrants. And so I was thinking those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So for me, the importance was that it be on glass. Now the originals are also taken on glass. So, I like working in glass, but it was very important for me to have that feeling that everything is so tenuous, that no one has been here that long. And to say, well, we were here first and we belong here, but you don't, is very disturbing to me. So that's how I came up with the glass house concept. And then it was a matter of speaking with, how am I going to build this? I can't build anything. And at the time I was living in an apartment. And then when we moved up to the Hudson Valley and I started being able to collect all the windows, then it was, well, I can't build anything. So it was just a matter of finding somebody who could take my idea and make it into a reality. And so going back and forth with a carpenter of how it could be arranged and how it could be moved so that the house comes apart. They're all panels and it could be come apart and then make people nervous when I take it to the gallery and they have to put it together.
Got it.
But the thing that's interesting is these are images are made on glass and then you use whatever digital scanning, whatever. I love the fact that you're using these 19th century, they're 19th century techniques, correct? Yeah. To make these glass negatives. And the thing that I find so interesting about it is that they're so smashable. I mean, you could just smash these people right about out of existence, which a lot of people are trying to do with the immigrant population. And so that's how the material kind of affected me, is when I went through it, I thought I could just smash every single one of these people.
Yep. Very
you can't
easily.
smash a photo.
Well, you can actually. I had a cat that used to eat my prints. So, so anything can be destroyed, but glass is definitely more fragile than anything else.
Well, that's what I loved about it, was the fragility of the whole concept of trying to come here and find a better life and running into all these problems with immigration and everything else, that it's fragile, that it's such a fragile thing. And so I think glass was such a perfect selection for this. And it would have been really easy to cop out and do plastic because it would have been a lot easier. But
actually it's not. It's not as
you tried it.
I did try it.
Oh, but I'm sure the result isn't anywhere near what this is.
Yeah, no, it's not.
No.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, John. What else did you have to say about this?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. That was, I'm through.
Okay, I blabbed enough.
So Judy, are you still there? Judy?
Well, she's on mute. There she goes.
I am doing my very best to make this work with Christian here beside me.
You are doing a fabulous job. I'm just wondering if we might get questions from the folks who are participating, if there's anything in the chat. How
we
are
don't
there some questions coming in?
Chat at this point, I don't think.
Okay.
I wondered, Jill, if you could talk a little bit more about how you connect modern techniques with the iPhone or with cell phones, and then connect them with these older methods, and making the old new again, or whatever.
Well, I can. That's not with this project though. These were all done. Well, actually, the pictures that as you walk in were done on, some were done in camera and some were done on a digital camera. And as you walk out, the same, because they were done on Ellis Island. But actually the two images that are behind me, which way can I go? Those two are new. And that's my newer work. And that is done with the iPhone. And then I come back home and I print it out on a transparency. And then I contact print it onto glass, onto the same wet plate collodion that these are all made from. And then I scan them in, and then I'm trying out all different kinds of ways to show them, which is what I go through is, these are from a train window, so I want them to look like a window. And I have some that are on a transparency that, move. And some, these just arrived today that were done on glass from a lab. So I'm not married to doing something in camera, but I like shooting in camera better. But if I have to, when I did the new project, I took a film camera, I took a digital camera, and I took my phone, and on different times to try and decide what I liked better. And I actually like the images from my phone the best. And then I can come back and transfer them to the wet plate. And one of the reasons why I like wet plate so much is because it's really a hand process. My hand is in it in every moment. Every glass plate is different, even if it could be the same image. If I'm taking two of a person, two portraits, or if I'm just making a contact print, each one is totally different. And that's what I like about the process.
Thanks for explaining that. I think it's fascinating.
Thank you.
And John, we keep going back to John too, and I'm going to try to do this at the same time. As a painter myself, I don't know how you talked about it. If somebody said it's tasty, they are so gorgeous. Those surfaces are so gorgeous, they make you weep. And I just love the way that you can interpret them in any way you want. And I think all of us interpret them in different ways. And I love the way you talked about it being like bodies. And then Jane, your house that you created in the TDP gallery, we've gotten such a charge out of watching people walk in and looking perplexed and then seeing the change on their faces when they realize, oh my gosh, look at that. Those are bombs. That's barbed wire. I think it's certainly been a wonderful exhibition for all of us who are part of 5 Points to enjoy as well. Just terrific, all three of you.
Great.
You.
It was a good curator. I can't even say it. Curator.
Move
It
the
was
T
a
down.
very good challenge and mix that you brought together of people who are, in a way, we're all showing a kind of beauty, and yet there's such a dark underbelly to that. And there is in everything. And that's why these pieces and other things, they never become irrelevant because the same stuff is going on.
That's so true. When I first started doing this, I kept saying, well, I better hurry because at some point, it's going to be, no one's going to think about it, because I started thinking about the immigration during 9/11. And then I thought, oh, I better start really photographing this faster because it won't be as relevant, and it just keeps getting more and more relevant.
More and more.
And
The more I
yours
do, the more it
definitely
is.
does, with all of the gun control and mess, and John were, never out of a war, and it just, they're always relevant. Sort of sad.
It's
I like
sad.
I like the fact, Jane, that you associate some pretty serious weapons with insects.
Yeah.
That's a real juxtaposition and a fabulous rethinking about, the revenge of the species on us.
Yeah. Part of it had to do with scale in terms of those insects. Like, I've always tried to do things that made sense scale wise. And those insect drawings are pretty small because insects are small. And then gallery said, make it bigger. People can't understand what's going on. Funeral arrangements, how bigger can they be? But there wasn't any specific reference to insects kind of taking over, but I could see how that could color your view, especially when you're looking in the dollhouse, because there's quite a few insects in there. In those little tiny paintings.
Well, they're going to survive us. That's for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No doubt about that.
We're just a blip in their, they're on a different time frame.
Yes.
So yeah, it's extraordinary work. It's great to see them together. I'm wondering though, Judy, if there's any questions coming from the outside at this point.
We don't seem to be having any, but both Christian and I are, I'm so grateful for his help as we're doing this tonight. But I also want to go back to John, myself again, and ask
Yep.
the question, why so large, John? They're huge.
Because I like the way it feels to make very large marks, and so that's part of it. I'm not good at small paintings, and I also it's part of a game that I played at a certain point, which was that I thought of all the reasons that, generally speaking, people don't want to have paintings in their homes, for example. And that one reason is because they would be too big. If you wouldn't want a painting that was too big, so I decided that I would make paintings that were too big, and that way I wouldn't have to worry about whether or not they ended up in the
That is so perfect. I'm sorry. I don't know if that was supposed to be funny, but it really was.
John, do you have
Yeah.
a favorite brand of paint that you use? Or is it any paint you happen to have?
No, I use like there's a couple of different like mid-market things, like nothing fancy, you know.
Are they oils?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One's Utrecht. I can't remember the other one that I generally get.
And can I ask why always oils? Do you ever use acrylics?
I have in the past couple of years, and I really liked it. But the problem was that project I was working very, very quickly on. So the acrylics made a lot of sense. But for generally speaking, my projects just drag on endlessly, and I just wouldn't. I don't like the way the acrylic feels as it's drying up on my palette. I just don't like it. I'd rather deal with the oil. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, I guess it must.
Perfect.
Yeah, I just
Perfect.
like
sense.
it.
Oils have a transparency that acrylics just never seem to achieve.
But I tell you,
Yeah.
there's like mediums and stuff that you can use. I mean, it's a great material. You can get pretty transparent and beautiful stuff, but I think oil, for some reason, is dirtier. But it's easier to get a sort of a dirty feel to it. Maybe, I don't know.
You have time to work on it.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, oil paint's just nice, slippery. It's a cool material.
I agree.
My-
Corner.
I think it's also very physical in that I experience it as a physical act. And so the scale, I can't really imagine them being small, because it's you've got to physically engage this work. You know, the oil, I don't know, I feel it in my hands. I just think it's a very intimate kind of medium. So you're not going for an effect. You know, I feel that's unfortunately what I feel about acrylic. Oil just has its, I love the idea that it's really dirty. It's a muddy paint. It's a kind of, there's an honesty to that I just think it's direct, and can't imagine these being small.
I just
No
want
way. Yeah.
to interject a second now to, I think our hour is about up. We don't have any other questions in the chat box right now. I want to thank the three of you for showing your amazing work in 5 Points. And Power, thank
Yep.
you again for an amazing job at moderating this discussion that
This was-
among the three totally amazing but different artists. Thank you all very, very much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Judy.
Judy.
Thanks,
And
Judy.
thank you, Power.
Thank
Great
all of
to
you.
You.
work with you guys.
I'll be back
Talk
up
to you
again
later.
soon with more people.
Excellent. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good night.
night.
Right.
Thank you all.